climate change. What is it, really? What does the data actually say? Is it man-made? What can we do about it? Are people right to be alarmed? We'll tackle this and more, all within the big picture of our Catholic faith today. On The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. I'm Jim Havens. It is Wholeness and Healing Monday, fighting to cultivate the health of the whole person, mind, body, and soul. With our co-host, my lovely wife, Becky Havens. She's a Catholic wife and mother with a passion and calling to educate people about the importance of caring for our bodies that the Lord has blessed us with by living a healthy lifestyle. She also helps others to think outside the cultural norms and to be their own advocate while not falling into the many pressures of modern medicine. She's the author of Toxin Free in 12 Months, a 12-month guide to help you transition over to a toxin-free lifestyle. She also wrote a boycott list of over 600 pro-abortion companies. You can get them both for free. Learn more at her website, safehavensmama.com. Our topic today, concerned about climate change. We're going to take a deep dive into this, but just fair warning, we're not doctors, not scientists, just regular people looking to live well and raise our family. We believe in objective truth and in asking questions when things do not make sense. We're not giving medical advice. We do want to offer a forum here today, as we always do. We know a thing or two, but there's still a ton we don't know. We have some personal experiences, as do you. We would love to hear from you on this topic. Any thoughts, comments, questions, anything that you might want to bring to the table. We'll put the phone number out a little bit later into the show, but I gotta also say we've got a lot of content to get to today, so we might not be able to get to many phone calls. But if you do have something pressing, we will put the number out there and we'll look to get you in. No survey today. So Becky, why don't we get started? You actually said, why don't we do this topic, climate change? Let's dig into it. So why your interest in this topic?
Mainly because it seems like it comes up a lot. It seems like there's a lot of different agendas surrounding climate change. And so as Catholics, we don't want to write everything off and just say, well, we don't believe this just because, we were told not to believe it. But we want to have a good idea of what it is, if there's any validity to it, and, where it came from and just all the details of it. I feel like I myself don't really know too much about it. And I know that you've done a ton of research on this topic, so I'm going to kind of sit back and listen a little bit to what you found. But it's good to be educated in this so we can have the right answers to give when we're approached about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a massive issue that is before us right now in our time, especially when there are many very powerful, influential people out there that are saying not only is this a big problem and saying the science is crystal clear that this is global warming or climate change, and it's man-made. We've got to reduce our emissions, our carbon footprint. That's the only way we can stop it. And it's an existential threat, meaning literally a threat to humanity's existence. So let's hear a few of those folks and what they have to say on it. This is UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2018. Here it is.
Every day, I'm faced with the challenges of our troubled and complex world. But none of them loom so large as climate change. If we fail to meet the challenge, all our other challenges will just become greater and threaten to swallow us. Climate change is quite simply an existential threat for most life on the planet, including and especially the life of humankind.
All right. So according to the UN Secretary General, it's the biggest threat you can imagine, threatening the life of humankind itself. So this is the biggest issue facing us. That's the argument. We're going to look into the data on it, but he's not the only one saying this. It all kind of flows from the UN, or at least it seems to be when it comes to where a lot of people are getting their talking points. But here's Democrat Senator Bernie Sanders in September 2020. Here it is.
Now, there are people out there in Washington, my colleagues in the Senate, they say the Green New Deal is too expensive. We can't afford it. Well, you tell me the alternative. Tell me the alternative if we're going to be looking at a planet which is burning up, if we're looking at more and more droughts and the decline of food production, If you're looking at more and more extreme weather disturbances, hurricanes and tornadoes, if you're looking at more and more disease, if you're looking at more and more mass migrations of people around the world who can no longer stay in their communities because there's no water or there is no food. Climate change is the existential threat to our planet.
All right, so here's the argument progressing: climate change, existential threat, literal threat to humanity. So therefore, we've got to take drastic political action to mitigate this. This is the only way we can save the planet, save the world, save humanity. Here's U.S. President Joe Biden's State of the Union address in 2023.
We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat.
All right, so there it is. This is reality. This is science. Therefore, we got to take this massive political action, and Biden is all in on that. And it's interesting. He wants to he wants to pump all this money into renewables. So we've got all of this government money. Follow the money, right? There is a glut of government money that is flowing when it comes to this this ability to get people to believe this sort of climate alarmism, this sort of almost climatism. Once you get into it, as we look at the data, what's there, what's not there, you'll start to see, I think, this is more of like a religious belief. This is more about faith than it actually is about real science, that this is an existential threat to humanity. But they're going to run with it and they're going to milk it for all it's worth. And they are making massive changes to a lot of things based on this lie. When we get into the data, you're going to see that this is really one big lie. Now, there is some truth to climate change, and we'll get into the data there. But the climate alarmism, the climatism, that is where it's a big leap way too far that is being used for really nefarious political purposes, which leads us to Democrat Representative AOC at a climate rally in New York City 8 months ago. Here she is.
So honored to be here today, shoulder to shoulder with you all, because we are all here for the same purpose: to protect the planet, the people, and make sure that we end fossil fuels across the globe.
All right, so there we go. There's the goal for AOC, at least one of them. Let's end fossil fuels. This doesn't seem too smart. So just pulling from a Washington Post article, what happens if you do that? It says, quote, if fossil fuel production were stopped tomorrow, the world would quickly grind to a halt. Even in areas where a large portion of electricity is run on renewables, fossil fuels are often used to provide firm power that can come on at any time of the day or night. Without that power, electricity grids would see widespread blackouts. Within a few weeks, a lack of oil, still the major fuel used for trucking and shipping goods worldwide, would impede deliveries of food and other essential goods. So even if you could get to the grocery store, not going to be any food there. Not a great idea from AOC, but she might say, well, I was kind of exaggerating there. We just need to scale them down and eventually get rid of them. Well, you got big problems with the renewables anyway. You know, sometimes it's not so windy. Sometimes the sun, well, it's only out during the daytime. And even then it's sometimes cloudy. There's a lot of issues with the technology, which we're going to get into as well. A lot to dive into here. But Becky, just so far in what's been kind of presented here about really the alarmism aspect to all of this, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to listen to all of that because as you hear more and more, you realize, you know, we know as Catholics, but anybody really should understand this point, that the biggest threat to humankind would be abortion at this point. And so just the fact that they are completely unaware, actually, they just probably deny it, and they think that climate change is the main issue, just kind of tells you all you need to know. And it kind of makes you take a step back and think, yeah, something's not adding up here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the child in the womb doesn't count for them. So they dehumanize the child in the womb. Forget about that. So even though we're directly murdering an entire class of people by the thousands every day, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all, because that doesn't fit their narrative, their ideology, their agenda. And so when it comes to scientific consensus on this is one of the first things you hear about this. Well, don't you know that there's a scientific consensus on all of this? This is a really big deal. What they're saying is the truth. Well, there's not really actually a scientific consensus on this. When you get into the details and you really dig into it, it's Barack Obama who actually brought that forward. I'm reading from a Fraser Institute report here, and it says that in 2013, U.S. President Barack Obama sent out a tweet claiming 97% of climate experts believe global warming is real, man-made, and dangerous. As it turns out, the survey he was referring to didn't even ask that question, so he was basically making it up. This is where it caught on. And then the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC from the UN, they do say that global warming is due to human activity, but they say we do not know how many experts agree with it. And nothing from the IPCC implies truly at the data level that we face a crisis requiring massive restructuring of the worldwide economy. In fact, it is consistent with the view that the benefits of fossil fuel use greatly outweigh the climate-related costs. We'll explain that as we go today as well. But you know what? There is a scientific consensus on when human life begins. Reading from a report on the NIH.gov website that biologists, well, we'll get to this when we get back, but there is a scientific consensus on when life begins, not on climate change. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
We've lost the vocabulary for spiritual struggle. You know, when the more draconian elements of the COVID interruption were rolled back, there are a number of dioceses whose rallying cry was, it's time to come back to the table. No, it isn't. It's time to come back to Calvary. Not even the Italians say we've sinned, let's eat.
The Catholic Current, 5 p.m. Eastern, from the Station of the Cross and on the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network presents Saints and Seasons. On May 20th, we celebrate the feast of St. Bernardine of Siena, Confessor. Bernardine was born in Siena to a noble Italian family in the year of our Lord 1380. He lost his parents when he was still very young, but a pious aunt raised him well, and he grew up devoted to prayer and fasting, especially in honor of the Blessed Mother. Though his handsome features exposed him to dangers in his youth, he maintained perfect chastity. At 17, he began to serve the sick in a local hospital. A few years later, after a brief but serious illness, he discerned a vocation to the Franciscans. Though Bernardine had a weak, hoarse voice, his superiors ordered him to preach because of his great wisdom, and his speech impediment was miraculously cured. He proceeded to set Italy on fire with his eloquence, fulfilling a prophecy by St. Vincent Ferrer. In every city he visited, the people kindled bonfires of the vanities to burn items related to vice. Bernardine became the great promoter of devotion to the holy name of Jesus, especially with the use of the IHS monogram. He refused several attempts to make him a bishop, though he served for a few years as vicar general of his order before his holy death in the year of our Lord 1444. Also honored on this day are St. Baudilus, King St. Ethelbert of the East Angles, St. Arcangelo Tadini, and many other martyrs, confessors, and holy virgins. For more about the saints and seasons of the Catholic Church, visit thestationofthecross.com/saints and seasons.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Becky Havens talking about climate change today. So look, there's no scientific consensus on climate change being a man-made, being in terms of human action is driving it to the degree that we need to be alarmed. This is an existential threat to humanity. There is more agreement scientifically on the fact that human activity is a main driver or even a primary driver of climate change, of global warming, we could say. There's more scientific agreement on that. I'd say from what I'm looking at, more like 50, 60, maybe upwards of 70% agreement in various surveys of actual people in scientific capacities, but that's nowhere near consensus. So that's an absolute lie. And when it comes to the alarmism aspect of it, not even the UN itself, from the level of the data, the IPCC is even making that argument at all. Again, we're going to get into that. But again, scientific consensus on when a human life begins, This is from NIH.gov, a report there. It says that Americans are split on whether the fertilization view, life beginning at fertilization, which is the actual biological fact of it, embryology of it, it's a scientific fact. Life begins at fertilization, or conception fertilization, we could say, that Americans are split on it in terms of their own opinion. It says that the fertilization view, they think, is a philosophical or religious belief by 45%. 46% think it's a biological and scientific fact. And only 38% of Americans view fertilization as the starting point of a human's life. So they're actually the science deniers here. So when people want to talk about who's denying science, let's start with talking about the ongoing daily mass murder of the child in the womb. And I misspoke earlier in the sense that, yes, they're being murdered by the thousands every day in the U.S. alone, hundreds of thousands worldwide. 200,000 preborn children are being directly murdered worldwide by abortion, and nobody seemingly cares all that much. By the way, biologists from 1,058 academic institutions around the world assessed survey items on when a human's life begins, and overall, 96% affirmed the fertilization view. That's as close to a scientific consensus as you get. This is a scientific fact, and we need to change the minds of the public. You want to talk about changing hearts and minds? This is the level we need to change them at. We should be talking about the science, the science, the science. Americans don't know it. They don't believe it. They need to be convinced of it. And that's what actually climate change folks have done a really good job at doing, convincing people about the science, even though many of them who are the biggest proponents and advocates of this climate change alarmism, they clearly haven't looked at the data themselves. So they say, trust the science. We know that's a loaded statement at this point. Our follow-up ought to be, show me the data. And then there's another question. Can we trust the scientists who are presenting the data? Can we trust that the data hasn't been fudged? I think that's also a reasonable question to ask. But let's go to Stephen Koonin. He's an American theoretical physicist, PhD from MIT, former director of the Center for Urban Science and Progress at NYU. From 2004 to 2006, the chief scientist, where he was responsible for guiding BP's long-range technology strategy, particularly in alternative and renewable energy sources. So he knows it from that angle. And then also from 2009 to 2011, he was the Undersecretary for Science, Department of Energy in the Obama administration. So he's not some partisan or political ideologue. He's also the author of the 2021 book, Unsettled: What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters. Listen to this quote presented from his book in this interview. It's Uncommon Knowledge with Peter Robinson, by the way. Listen to Koonin's response on what he calls advisory malpractice and usurpation of the rights of non-experts to make their own decisions. Listen carefully. Here it is.
In Unsettled, you quote the late climate research scientist Stephen Schneider.
Right.
Okay.
He's a Stanford guy.
Stanford guy.
Right.
This is Schneider writing all the way back in 1989. Schneider, on the one hand, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method. On the other hand, we are not just scientists, but human beings as well. We'd like to reduce the risk of disastrous climate change. That entails getting media coverage, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. Close quote. Well, scientists are human beings. What's wrong with that?
I think Schneider's attitude, and I never met him, by the way, which is not uncommon among many people, is a advisory malpractice and is a usurpation of the right of non-experts to make their own decisions. And let me explain. The biggest problem in trying to reduce emissions is not the 1.5 billion people in the developed world. It's the 6.5 billion people who don't have enough energy. And you're telling them that because of some vague, distant threat that we in the developed world are worried about, that they're going to have to pay more for energy or get less reliable sources and so on. They should be able to make their own choices about whether they're willing to tolerate whatever threat there might be from the climate versus having round-the-clock lighting, having adequate refrigeration, having transportation, and so on.
Billions of people in India and China,
6.5 billion
still
people.
Poor.
Right, absolutely. They're energy starved. So a great statistic, I don't think I have it in the book, 3 billion people on the planet of the 8 billion use less electricity every year than the average U.S. refrigerator. Okay? So fix that problem first, which is existential and immediate and soluble, and then we can talk about some vague climate thing that might happen 50 years from now.
But scientists must tell the truth.
Absolutely. Completely lay it all out. And we're not getting that out of the scientific establishment. I know that.
All right, so he makes a couple of really important points in there. We're going to follow up on that one where he's talking about people who are living in these undeveloped nations and how it's actually immoral for us to be withholding electricity, fossil fuels from them when that's actually what they need right now to survive and to live. And we're withholding it, saying, no, sorry, that's not really good for the planet right now. We got to reduce our emissions. Sorry about that. No, that's immoral. And he calls that out rightly. We'll come back to that. But also, I think what's really interesting about Koonin is he knows the science and he gets into it and he knows how it's all being played. And it all really comes back to the UN and this IPCC, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So I want to play this last clip, Becky, here on this aspect of it and then get you to comment on it. So the UN assessment reports that are put out by the IPCC, Koonin's interesting because he says, look, I actually agree with their data. I actually accept their data. I believe that the Earth is warming, and I believe that it is there is an element here where it is man-made. It is fossil fuel influence. That's one element. That's one part among many. I don't know that he would agree that that's the prime driver, but I think he does say yes, that's part of it, and that ought to be looked at. But nowhere near the degree, no alarmism, none of this nonsense that we're hearing, because he's going to explain what happens here he's saying in the data, there's nothing there that would adequately or imply in any way this alarmism that they're taking that data and then they're spinning it and then they keep spinning it. It's kind of like this sick telephone game. And then you come out the other side, you get people like Al Gore and John Kerry and Bernie Sanders and AOC. But that's not actually what the data says. Even the UN IPCC's own data. Here's Koonin. Here it is.
You know, the UN puts out every 5 or 6 years assessment reports that are the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, right, that are meant to survey, assess, summarize the state of our knowledge about the climate. The most recent one came out about a year ago in 2022. Previous one came out in 2014 or so. And when you read those reports, they're massive. The latest one is 3,000 pages, and it took 300 scientists a couple of years to write. And you really need to be a scientist to understand them. Even I, as I started to dig into climate science, I got a background in theoretical physics. I can understand this stuff. It took me a couple years to really understand what goes on. Now, Ambassador Kerry, other politicians certainly have not done that. But when he's getting his information perhaps from the summary for policymakers in those reports, or more likely for an even further boiled down version. And as you boil down the good assessment into the summary, into more condensed versions, there's plenty of room for mischief. And that mischief is evident when you compare what comes out the end of that game of telephone with what the actual science really is.
All right, so there it is. So what he's basically saying is the data says one thing. Koonin actually says he agrees with it. I'm a bit more skeptical even on the data coming out of the IPCC because just what we played in that clip before where there's a scientist there saying, well, I feel pressure that I need to kind of make it seem a little bit more alarming or a little bit, I gotta whip it up a little bit because I feel like this moral obligation to the planet or something. Basically, they hold a certain ideology. They want to fit their science to it. I think there's probably a lot of people like that. Plus, they want the money to keep flowing. And if they say something that disagrees with the political narrative, well, their grants are going to get cut off or whatever else. They're going to be called a science denier, like people like Koonin and others who have simply just been honest about what the science actually is. So but he accepts that data. I say, okay, it may be right, it may be wrong. I don't know. I'm skeptical about it, but he accepts it. And he says, even that, again, no climate alarmism, but as the governments that are represented at the UN, they take that data, start spinning it, putting out these press releases, then it gets to the media. They spin it even more because if it bleeds, it leads. Plus, this is all political anyway. So there's a certain narrative. Again, as this gets pushed forward, it gets further and further from what the actual data is. The climate alarmism is absolute nonsense. That's not what the data says. And nobody's actually looking at the data because, as he says, you have to be a scientist. You have to, he has a PhD, theoretical physics is his background as well. And he's saying it took him 3 years to really study the data and understand it. So anybody who's telling you there's a scientific consensus, I've looked at all the data, I understand all the data, they're wrong. Just based on what the IPCC at the UN says from a scientific perspective itself. If you believe that, then you don't believe the actual climate alarmism nonsense. Becky, any thoughts on what's been presented here thus far?
Yeah, it's a lot of information that it's kind of hard to follow a little bit. But my question is, do they actually really care? Like, are they that passionate about the climate and the world? Do they honestly really care? They don't care about killing babies. Why this big passion on the world, on these things that they think may happen? It seems like, yeah, they're just looking for a way to raise money, to bring forth money. And that's just the cover up. Is that kind of what's going on? Because it's not making sense in my mind.
Yeah, I think, we'll try to stitch that together some, but there's a lot to pull on there on that thread. But I think it certainly seems like when you look at what is taking place with the World Economic Forum, how they kind of try to take this and run with it, as well as various others, it's about control. It's about government control. It's about, similarly to what we saw in COVID, can you find an excuse to seize control? Can you find a reason to say, hey, for your own good, we've got to take all this control? And if you actually care about your fellow man, you have to, out of charity, go along with all of this. I think that's what it's really all about. We'll have more on it when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here, talking about climate change today, trying to get to the bottom of some things, hopefully for your benefit. Hopefully you find it helpful and edifying. We're going to go now to Michael Schellenberger. He's been on this case and been doing a great job. He's the author of a book, Apocalypse Never: Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. Great book. Highly recommend it. And by the way, you see the polar bears there on the front cover. Want to let you know, looking at a fact sheet right here, just saying that in the 50s and 60s, there were between 5,000 and 10,000 polar bears. Today, there are between 15,000 and 25,000. Also, a director of wildlife research with the Arctic government of Nunavut says that of the 13 populations of polar bears in Canada, 11 are stable or increasing in number. They are not going extinct or even appear to be affected at present. So that's good news if you're concerned about those nice polar bears. But let's go to Michael Schellenberger here. He's been called a science denier when in fact he also agrees with the data from the IPCC. And that's, again, why he's an interesting character. He doesn't even question the data at that level from the UN. He says, I agree that this is that the Earth is warming, that there's man-made activity causing it, even to the degree that it's the prime driver. I'll accept all of that. And in no way will I accept this alarmism nonsense. It does not have anything to do with that data whatsoever. It is not to that extreme by any means. Here's Schellenberger.
I definitely deny that climate change represents a significant catastrophic risk. I don't believe that anywhere in the mainstream science is any scenario for existential risk. Not in the working group 1 of the IPCC is there anything mentioning an apocalyptic scenario. And in fact, all the trends are going in the right direction. But when it comes to climate science, I agree with the IPCC's basic view of the core science. Where I part company is with the policy prescriptions. But I do believe that the Earth is getting warmer and that greenhouse gases in general and carbon dioxide in particular are what's driving that warming.
All right, so there he is. We're going to come back to him in just a minute, but we did mention earlier how, some of the nefarious motives that might be behind all of this. Do they even care? What is this? I think a lot of them are, yes, they have evil motives. I think that's clear when you really take an objective view of all of this. However, we can't know with 100% certainty. But I would say that it would be a reasonable conclusion to come to when it comes to the WEF, Klaus Schwab, and all of the ideological Marxism that is behind all of this and pushing for this radical government control and using this as a means to grab it. However, I think there's a lot of innocent people or fairly innocent people that are being victimized by this. They hear this stuff, they believe it, they're being told there's a scientific consensus on this. Don't you care? And then their heart goes out and they get all worked up about it. And there's even something like climate anxiety now that is affecting people, especially young people. They've been indoctrinated with this stuff year after year in their schools. It makes some of them nuts. Here's an example of it. Maybe you've heard of her. Greta Thunberg, I think her name is. She's a poster child of what happens to children when they start believing this stuff. And the UN props her up as some sort of a hero. Here she is in her famous speech a few years back, where she was just absolutely indignant. And you judge for yourself whether you think she's sincere or not. But I think the most benign sort of interpretation of Greta is that she's a big victim in all of this, or an example of that, even if she's faking herself, and this is all one big act from her, which, by the way, she did just pop up a couple days ago at a big protest against Israel at the big Eurovision mess in Europe. She popped up with a crowd that was protesting anti-Israel, saying Israel's committing genocide and all of that. So I guess she's flipped onto a new issue now. But anyway, she is an example that there are children being affected, whether it's her or not, that are believing these lies and getting all worked up. Here's the example.
I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
All right, so there's Greta Thunberg, and she says she's one of the lucky ones, and I immediately think, you're lucky. You weren't murdered in the womb of your mother like 1/3, 1/4 of your generation, right? I'm one of the lucky ones as well. I was born in 1977. My mom could have murdered me in her womb, and nobody would have thought twice about it. We're one of the lucky ones. We were born. Don't we have any obligation towards those that are being murdered every single day? But she's not being told about that in her school. She's being told about this climate alarmism and getting all worked up and doing protests from now she doesn't go to school anymore, protesting the school because for climate reasons and all of this nonsense. But anyway, Becky, what is your thought on this when you see that whether she's sincere or not, there are children that are believing this stuff, being indoctrinated, getting all worked up? I'm sure everybody knows one or two of them. What is your thought on it?
Yeah, I actually thought that was a joke the first time I saw it, because I couldn't believe that somebody would be saying those things. It's not even true what she's saying. So I thought maybe somebody was making her read that. Maybe they're paying her money, or I don't know. It seems so odd to me that a young girl would be getting emotional like that on something that's not even true. So the other option is that that's just what she's been brainwashed with, which is no different than what's going on with all of the transgender stuff now, and all the different forms of like beings that you can be, like all the, I don't even know how to say it, different identities that are out there. People truly believe like that's true. These young people actually think like you can like be a cat or you can be something different, and people have to respect that. It's insanity. It's total insanity. And so it just seems like the evil has stepped up, and people they're believing it, and they're having like crazy teachers and people around them like validating this and saying, we don't want to hurt their feelings, so we're going to go ahead and let them continue to think that. And so it's a complete, these children are being completely taken advantage of and not being shown the truth. So
that's right. Yeah, they're being exploited, absolutely, in a very serious way. And this is, again, back to Michael Schellenberger. He gives some great advice how to talk to somebody who is deceived by this climate alarmism, specifically giving this advice for parents if they have a child that's been taken in by this. Here it is.
I think rather than getting into a kind of heated argument or a debate about it, asking their kids for references. If they're saying things like climate change is ending the world, it's where did you get that from? And can you show me the scientific papers? And is that in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? I wrote Apocalypse Never in part because I wanted it to be for friends and family of people that had embraced this climate fanaticism. So you could kind of go through it. It summarizes all the evidence. I point to specific peer-reviewed scientific papers, to parts of the IPCC, and start to pull this stuff apart, around all of it, hurricanes, fires. I gave a talk yesterday, and certainly at environmentalprogress.org, which is the website and the organization that we founded, we have these slides set up, and we try to get the primary data or the top scientific data, and you see that really it doesn't support any of the extreme statements that people make.
Yeah. When you dig into that, all that stuff, nothing's getting worse and more frequent. The scientific data doesn't support any of that. And yet you keep hearing this. Somebody walks outside, oh, it's so hot today, must be climate change. And people might say that as a joke, but a lot of people, they just think that way. And it's like, yeah, it's a hot day. It might be the hottest day on record, maybe that we have over the last 100 years. Records go back further than that, though. And measurements, even our measurements now aren't so great, but 100 years ago, before that, not so great. But when you look at the science long term, not just over 100 years, but over 1,000 years or more, you start to get to put things in perspective. This is not the hottest the Earth has ever been, and there's nothing to be alarmed about. At least there's nothing in the data showing us that there's anything to be alarmed about, and yet that's the narrative, and everybody's running with it again to seize government control, I think, is the main thing. So Schellenberger actually is optimistic that climatism is coming to an end. And he points to the downfall of renewables. They just don't work. And plus, there's another problem with them he points out here. Let's go to that. Here it is.
The climatism is coming to an end as renewables come into crisis everywhere in the world because of both local community opposition to the land use impacts, as well as the high associated costs of transmission lines, backup storage. And those things are taking the bloom off the rose, and so we now see that renewables are actually awful for the environment. It takes 300 to 600 times more land to produce the same amount of electricity from renewables, solar and wind, as it does from a natural gas or nuclear plant. And so you're seeing a real-world environmental impacts of renewables that then undermines. It's a contradiction within the climatist discourse, and you start to see an undermining of that political movement.
All right, so there's a good point to know that the renewables actually, they're worse for the environment when you start to look at how the process actually plays out. And so doesn't work, worse for the environment. Plus there are issues with it doesn't work in terms of where the technology even is at and where it can even go. There seems to be major red flags, how far you're going to get in your electric car before it needs to be charged, and all sorts of issues with the renewables. And so he's optimistic it's coming to an end. I do recommend his book, Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All, Michael Schellenberger. Also want to recommend one other book here. That Unsettled book is one that I recommended earlier by Koonin. But then a third one, False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. This is Bjorn Lomborg. And so I highly recommend looking into this stuff if you're interested. If not, hopefully today it gives you a little bit of a primer on how to understand it, how to talk about it. And we've got a few more things when we get back from the break. But for now, Becky, any other thoughts, anything coming to mind as you listen and digest all this today?
No, I just think it's kind of eye-opening to see where we are as just, I won't even say a nation, but as a world, because it's like somebody gets an idea and then that gets popular and then it spreads throughout the world. And all of a sudden the United Nations is like pushing for this. And it's kind of scary that that's what can come about. I mean, we saw that, like you mentioned earlier, with COVID. And it is almost like they get an idea and they think, how can we take power? How can we use this for our good? And it just reminds us to be on the lookout for people trying to gain control and control people's minds and thoughts and ultimately, like, control the planet. I think that's actually like the main goal of these people, which is totally crazy that they would use something that it doesn't even have the data to back it up. So I'm glad to hear that man was saying he thinks it's coming to an end, because, it's like enough is enough. If they see the data and they see that this isn't working, okay, time to pull back. If they really actually cared about that, they would say, this isn't working. Time to start something new,
Yeah. I'm not so optimistic, sadly. I like his points, but I do think that there's a lot of power behind this, and a lot of it is from the enemy, Satan himself. And I don't see a back down on this anytime soon. Because the thing is like, he's making a reasonable argument of why he thinks the renewables, that all that evidence is coming to light and people are going to see that evidence. But the fact is people don't care about evidence. People don't care about the actual facts. Abortion is a good example of that. And so I'm just not quite as optimistic. Plus, there is a population reductionism aspect to this. We're going to hit on that when we get back. Plus, this great article from Breitbart: climate experts are 0-53 on their doomsday predictions. For more than 50 years, climate alarmists in the scientific community and environmental movement have not gotten even one prediction correct, but they do have a perfect record getting them wrong. Here's some of the examples. 1968, overpopulation will spread worldwide. 1970, ice age by 2000. 1974, space satellites show new ice age coming fast. 76, scientific consensus, planet cooling, famines imminent. 1988, world's leading climate expert predicts lower Manhattan underwater by 2018. There's tons of these. Never come true. We'll be back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here talking about climate change, climate alarmism today, climatism, you can call it. Let's do a few more of those predictions that never came through. These are different headlines, I guess, from 2000. Actually, this is 1989. UN warns that entire nations wiped off the face of the earth by 2000 from global warming. In 2000, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. How about these? 1989, rising sea levels will obliterate nations if nothing done by 2000. 2008, climate man Al Gore predicts ice-free Arctic by 2013. And then in 2009, he moves his 2013 prediction of an ice-free Arctic to 2024. Yeah, that one didn't work out either. Prince Charles in 2009 says we have 96 months to save the world. So this is all the nonsense that we get. There ought to be red flags all over the place for people. And if they even just do a bit of a digging on this, any fair-minded person would get to what I've gotten to in just over the weekend, which is the IPCC data in the UN doesn't even support this alarmism. Let's go to Jordan Peterson and hear his thoughts on climatism. I don't think he even agrees with the data at the IPCC level. He's got more fundamental questions. I've got skepticism there as well, but let's hear from Jordan Peterson. Here it is.
This isn't data. This is guess. And there's something weird underneath it. There's something weird that isn't oriented well towards human beings underneath it. It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future. It's like that's what the bloody communists said. And they killed a lot of people doing it. And we're walking down that same road now with this insistence that, we're so compassionate that we care about the poor 100 years from now. And if we have to wipe out several 100 million of them now, well, that's a small price to pay for the future utopia. And we've heard that sort of thing before. And the alternative to that is for is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future. And that's exactly what's happening now with organizations like the WEF. And if this wasn't immediately impacting the poor in a devastating manner, I wouldn't care about it that much, but it is.
All right, there's Jordan Peterson. He has quite a way of saying it that is very good. And so, interesting here that as he sort of brings out this sense of, look, there's a sense we ought to be kind of outraged about what's going on here, and that there is something sort of sick and twisted behind this. What is all of that? These are good questions to be asking, and so we ought to ask those questions. Now, it does concern me that we see a world leader, our Holy Father himself, Pope Francis, who seems to be going along with this. Again, to Peterson's point about communism, who did we see in those clips in the beginning of the show? Socialist, communist, Marxist wing of the Democrat Party that have infiltrated there, AOC, Bernie Sanders. These are the people saying existential threat. They've gotten it to the UN level. They've gotten it to the presidential level, world leader level. Biden's willing to echo these things. Even Pope Francis is now saying these things. He warned on Thursday, this is just from this past week, says that climate change has become a planetary crisis and billions face, quote, an extremely high risk of climate-related devastation. In his address to participants in a Vatican-sponsored climate summit, he said, from climate crisis to climate resistance, the pontiff asserted that the data on climate change is getting worse every year, putting all human beings in grave danger. So he doesn't say existential threat, but pretty close, pretty much what he's saying. He says the specter of climate change looms over every aspect of existence, threatening water, air, food, and energy systems. This planetary crisis, he says, demands a universal approach and swift, decisive action capable of producing political change and decisions, he urged. So the Pope getting political with these folks on climate change, going along with the political agenda. Look, I don't know his motives. I don't know. It seems to me it's very likely he's just deceived by this stuff, as a lot of people are. So I don't really question his morals being evil here. But I do think he's very, very wrong. And this is a clear-cut case where we can disagree with a pope. He doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to the data, when it comes to the actual science. He's just throwing his hat into the ring with these various government leaders who want him to get on their climate bus for the sake of humanity. He doesn't seem to understand the issues well. And if he only devoted half as much time talking about the real existential threat to humanity, abortion, mass murdering people by the thousands, hundreds of thousands every day, that would be terrific. Sad that he doesn't choose to do that. One more clip, and then Becky, I want to get your thoughts. Let's go to Bill Maher again, just from some weeks back here, talking about abortion. And look, at least he's being honest about it. But listen to how honest he's being about it. He tells the truth about it. He's a population reductionist, and that's where a lot of people are coming from. They don't actually care about people dying, about a mass amount of people dying, whether it's COVID, whether it's abortion, whether it's climate change. I don't think they actually care, but they do care about political agendas and various things. And Maher seems locked in. If you ever hear him on climate change, he's locked in on the scientific consensus nonsense. He thinks that's true. He's never looked at the data himself. That's ridiculous, but that's what he spouts all the time. Anyway, let's hear him clearly about population reductionism. That's where these folks are coming from. Here it is.
None of you believe it's murder. You know, that's why I don't understand the 15-week thing. Or the Trump's plan is, let's leave it to the states. You mean, so killing babies is okay in some states? Like, I can respect the absolutist position. I really can. I scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what? They just hate women, people who aren't pro-life, pro-choice. They don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder. And it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on that. What?
That's quite harsh, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not
Is
sure
that not your position if you're pro-choice?
Yep, that's the position. The choice is murdering children, mass murdering children by the hundreds of thousands worldwide every day. And they laugh it off as he says, who cares? There's 8 billion people in the world. Who cares if we're killing them, right? They laugh like it's a joke. This is really what folks believe, what a lot of these people believe, and where a lot of this is coming from. And so they have an evil belief, which is the ends justify the means. So if they think there's a good end, they're fine with murdering a various amount of people. If they think it's overpopulation and that's causing global warming and that's the big human driver, we got to get rid of people and we got to cut them down. I don't know, cut out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 billion people to get it to where I think it's going to be good for the rest of the people. They're happy to go along with these things because they believe the ends justify the means. We don't believe that. That's not a Catholic belief. That's not a Christian belief. That's not a Judeo-Christian belief. You can't do evil to bring about a good. Don't do evil. So we don't murder each other. We're not for that. But people who don't have that grounding in a Judeo-Christian ethic, all things are on the table for them. And that's one of the scary things about it, Becky.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why they care, because eventually they're going to be gone. A lot of these people who believe this are older men, and probably like their 60s and over. And at some point, they're going to be gone, and they're trying to wipe out 6 million people, 6 million babies. There's going to be nothing left. And if they love, the planet and humanity, like, well, I don't know why they would want to set it up like that. It makes no sense. But on the last thing that he says, isn't that what pro-choice is? And it's like, yeah, that is exactly what being pro-choice is. So he's being honest about it. He's saying that's actually what pro-choice people believe, but many pro-choice people will not say that. They get very uncomfortable if you say that, but he's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we didn't get to calls today, but shoot me an email if you have questions, comments on this. If I get enough of them, you guys want to do another show, I'm happy to open up the phone lines the entire show and listen to what people think. You can reach me at jimh@thestationofthecross.com, jimh@thestationofthecross.com, and hear this from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Under the 7th commandment, thou shalt not steal, the dominion granted by the Creator over the mineral, vegetable, and animal resources of the universe cannot be separated from respect for moral obligations, including those towards generations to come, to which we say yes. We do want to be good stewards of nature, of the earth that God gave us, and of all humanity. Stop abortion, and let's be also against various types of pollution and exploitation.